they called me for military service. And unfortunately, I had, in those days, high blood pressure. So I was rejected because of high blood pressure. So, because I was rejected, I filed to go to college. I'm from Colorado, so I filed to go to the University of Colorado. Then guess what happened? They called me again. So I went and said, you people are wasting your time. I have high blood pressure. You know what they said? Next. So I said, fine. They sent me to Fort Knox, Kentucky, to the Armored Infantry to drive a tank. So there I was, driving the M4A3 Sherman tank. Now the problem, and I liked driving the tank, it was very interesting, but the problem in those days, when the tanks all got together and drove around, they raised a tremendous amount of dust. So I went to the personnel office and I said, I like driving a tank, but I don't like all that dust. So they transferred me to the Corps of Engineers and sent me to Los Alamos, New Mexico. Do you know what? To help with the atomic bomb. So I was down there with Oppenheimer. And the atomic bomb is a very simple device. Very, very simple. So I was in the Corps of Engineers. Congress decided that the atomic program should be under civilian control, the Atomic Energy Commission. So they said, you can stay here as a civilian and continue, or you can continue in the military. Well, I said, no, I'll continue in the military. So you know what they did? They sent me to Fort Benning, Georgia, to the infantry school. And at the infantry school, when you went there, all they would do is harass people. They would come to the barracks and they'd dump everything on the floor, and then they'd say, we have inspection in 5 minutes. Fine. So on one occasion, we had a rifle inspection. The guy comes over and grabs my rifle, and he said, there's dust on the left rear windy sight bulb. He shoved it in my face. He said, don't you see that dust? I said, there's no dust there. So he shoves it again in my face. He said, don't you see that dust? I said, hey, you're completely mistaken. There's no dust there. So you know what they did? They gave me a toothbrush and they asked me to go out and wash the company street. So I'm out there washing the company street, and a group of colonels came along and they said, what on earth are you doing? And I said, well, I'm washing. They said, they said that ridiculous. Anyway, anytime they had a program at Fort Benning, they would put one of the candidates in charge of it. If they had the rifle company in the night attack, they'd choose somebody to be the company commander, he'd be in charge. So they put me in charge of all the programs. And every time you did a program, you got an observation. The observations were superior, excellent, satisfactory, unsatisfactory. So I got my first observation, very unsatisfactory. I said that's not on the list. Anyway, so they kept doing that. So I had so many unsatisfactory observations that I had to appear before a board of colonels. And the colonel in charge said to the tactical, he said, where did you give this candidate a very unsatisfactory observation? And the colonel said, he says, for your information, we had an observer from the infantry school there, and he said it was the best performance of TC-87 we've ever had at the infantry school. So after that, they didn't give me any more trouble. So when you graduated, you received a commission in the Army, and you could choose your branch of service. And the tactical said, we don't want this man to choose the infantry. And I said, what makes you think I want to be in the infantry? So what I did, I chose the chemical corps. And I went up to the chemical corps, and they had a program there called military chemistry. And there was a colonel in charge of preparation of a manual on military chemistry. Well, this colonel was having a problem, so they asked me to help him. And I did. He was a complete ignoramus. So the Chemical Corps has a publication called Military Chemistry. And guess who is the author? I am. Well, after a while, there was an announcement that the colonel's wife was coming to join him. And we said, what on earth person could be married to this idiot? So when she came, absolutely a beautiful woman. We couldn't believe it, but you never know what's going to happen. So, I was there at the Chemical Corps, and I got into an argument with the commandant because you had a certain amount of leave, and I didn't take the leave. And he ordered me to take the leave. And I said, I don't want to take the leave. So you know what they did? They sent me to Japan to help General MacArthur. So, at that time, the Army of Occupation, I have the Army of Occupation Medal for Japan. So, at that time, they were having trouble with residual Japanese resistance because although Japan had surrendered, not all of the Japanese soldiers were surrendering. So there were still some in the Marianas Islands. So they sent me down to the Marianas Islands to help clear them out. And since I was in the Chemical Corps, I was dealing with chemicals. And what we did, well, we had all kinds of chemicals. We had tear gas, we had phosgene, we had all kinds of chemicals. We also had a flamethrower. So when some of these resistant Japanese soldiers were in a bunker, what we would do is bring up the flamethrower and heat up the area, and then they'd all come out and surrender. It worked beautifully. So when my tour of duty came to an end, you know what they wanted to do? You never guessed. They wanted to send me to West Point. So I said, look, I am from Colorado. I want to go back to the University of Colorado. And it was a good thing. Because what? Guess what happened? at the University of Colorado, they had some very attractive ladies. In fact, they had one named Gwendolyn Vanderveer, who was the sister of Miss America. So when I was there, they had a dance, and guess what? I asked Gwendolyn Vanderveer to go to the dance, and she said yes. So we went to the dance, and when I came in, the professors all came over, and I couldn't help but laugh. What happened? Anyway,